Thank you for coming to today's program featuring Congressman Adam Schiff and Jamie Lee Curtis. I'm Andrea Grossman, the founder of Writer's Block, now in our 26th season. Thank you. I want to thank the Beverly Hills Bar Association for their co-hosting, and great thanks to the Culver City School District for all of their help. We're so grateful that you're here today, notwithstanding some baseball game that's happening someplace else in the country. Huge thanks to one of our greatest congressional representatives in Washington now or in recent memory, Adam Schiff. And to Jamie Lee Curtis, author, actor, and activist. So, straight A's in my book. Remember the boring old days when Adam Schiff really didn't make too many headlines in the LA Times? He was a terrific congressman from 2000 through 2016, but with being chair or ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which covers, to name a few, Homeland Security, the FBI, Department of Justice, Department of State, and so many other agencies, Schiff was a quietly very busy guy. But in 2017, barely moments after the inauguration, Schiff really started to make noise. He went on record dropping hints about Russian election interference. We know what happened next. He earned more nicknames from the president than he could hope for. Ordinary villains score 1, but Schiff bagged not 1, not 2, but 3. And then came the first impeachment trial. You know you've done something right when Trump hates you. Fear not, good people. In his new book, Midnight in Washington, Schiff leads us into the Capitol on January 6th as it is attacked. His harrowing account is a must-read. I told Schiff backstage that I love my crime thrillers, and this ranks up there. As he takes us through the 4 years of the Trump presidency, he unveils seemingly endless challenges and of corruption, criminality, and worse, Republican compliance. And the best part, he names names. I don't expect that it'll make his Republican colleagues love him more than they do now. Jamie Lee Curtis, like Adam Schiff, clearly knows no fear. You saw all of her fans outside. Besides the Halloween franchise, she starred in our favorite movies, including A Fish Called Wanda, True Lies, Freaky Friday, Knives Out, and of course on TV, Scream Queens. She's the author of almost a dozen enormously popular and topically significant children's books and is a social and political activist. So here's what's going to happen today. Congressman Schiff and Jamie Lee Curtis will chat. When they're through, we'll have time for some questions, and there are microphones that are going to be in the aisles down here. Adam Schiff has already signed the books, and I urge you to pick up more signed copies. They make a perfect gift for anyone who loves what our nation still stands for. So, ladies and gentlemen, Adam Schiff and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Happy Sunday. What's happening, Adam Schiff? Why? Sorry, that's not how I'm going to start. Thank you for being here. I'm going to try to do this with some intelligence, but I'm a bit of a fangirl, so I may just sit here and just going to go, tell us what to do. In 1998, Richard Rorty wrote a book called Achieving Our Country. He's a left writer. And this quote obviously circulated during the many elections. But this really got me because it sort of had prescience about where we are today. And it says, the non-suburban electorate will decide that the system has failed and start looking around for a strong man to vote for, someone willing to assure them that once he is elected, the smug bureaucrats, tricky lawyers, overpaid bond salesmen, and postmodernist professors will no longer be calling the shots. One thing that is very likely to happen is that the gains made in the past 40 years by Black and brown Americans and by homosexuals will be wiped out. Jocular contempt for women will come back into fashion. All the resentment which badly educated Americans feel about having their manners dictated to them by college graduates will find an outlet. And they did. Why did this happen, Adam Schiff? I'm going to go to the book, which of course is the reason we're here, but that quote was really powerful to me. And does that ring true to you? Does that make sense to you that that happened?
It does ring all too true. And first of all, I'm just trying to get over the fact that I'm sitting on a stage with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Oh, stop it.
And when you began by asking the question, why is this happening? I'm thinking, why am I sitting on the stage with Jamie Lee Curtis? That's a very good question, and I'm just so excited. That is the most eerie prognostication. It's just absolutely remarkable. When Donald Trump was running for president, first of all, I never thought he would get the Republican nomination. In fact, I used to tell this joke on the stump that there was no way Donald Trump was going to be the Republican nominee for two reasons. The first was that Republicans weren't that crazy, and the second was that Democrats weren't that lucky. But as it turned out, they were that crazy, and none of us were very lucky. But what I think Donald Trump did, like so many other would-be autocrats around the world, is he spoke to people who had been at the end of their ropes, people who had worked their whole lives, had nothing set aside for their retirement. Their kids, if they were lucky enough to go to college, graduated in debt with no jobs. He described them as forgotten people, and he promised that he was going to never forget them. And a lot of these folks, I think, were ready to vote for somebody who was just going to break everything. And he did. Now, he did nothing for these people. And I think this is among the most important parts of the electorate that the Democratic Party needs to address. They have real economic distress. And the other thing that Donald Trump did when he was making his appeal to the forgotten people was he put in a bit of poison and said that those others who don't look like you look down on you. And if you can persuade people that others condescend to them, they will never support anyone who they believe looks down on them. And so I think we need to treat people with respect. I think we have to meet their economic needs. He also, of course, played on that xenophobic populism that says that the reason you're in the predicament you are in is because of people who don't look like you. And this gets very much to the point of the author of that rather chilling prognostication. But this is part of the reason why what we're embarked on right now in the Congress, passing a Build Back Better Act and passing an infrastructure bill, the rescue plan that we passed that lifted half the kids who are in poverty in this country out of poverty, is so important. It's important in its own right to help families, but it's also part of the democracy agenda, because at the end of the day, if a democracy doesn't deliver, people start looking for other answers, like authoritarianism.
Let's talk about your book, please. So it begins with the insurrection of January 6th, and I won't read a lot of it because I want people to read it, and I want you to be able to talk about it. But the description of being on the floor there and trapped on the House floor, a violent mob crashing through the doors, you and your colleagues fled for your lives, and once you were in a secure location, a fellow Democrat leaned over and said, "You said this would happen." And you said, "Well, I didn't say this would happen." And they said, "Well, you warned that he would try to cheat again." And you said it didn't require any great clairvoyance. Someone really should have impeached the son of a bitch. And a quote from the first chapter is, "You can't let them see you," a Republican member said to me. "He's right," another Republican member said. "I know these people. I can talk to them. I can talk my way through them. You're in a whole different category." In that moment, we were not merely members sorry, I didn't know I was going to have to hold a microphone. Of different political parties, but on opposite sides of a much more dangerous divide. At first, I was oddly touched by these GOP members and their evident concern. But by then, I had been receiving death threats for years, and that feeling soon gave way to another. If these Republican members hadn't joined the president in falsely attacking me for 4 years, I wouldn't need to be worried about my security. None of us would. So my first question is, you start out the book with your firsthand account of the insurrection. What were you thinking when you witnessed the attack, and how have your thoughts changed since then?
I was one of 4 House members that the Speaker asked to manage the opposition to this effort to overturn the election, and I was so fixated on what I was saying on the House floor and what the Republicans were saying and how I was going to rebut what they were saying that I really wasn't paying attention to what was going on down the mall. In fact, the first time that I knew that something was wrong was when I looked up and the Speaker was no longer presiding. And I knew, because we had been in endless meetings with the Speaker, the 4 of us, to prepare for that day, it was her intention to preside the entire day. And I thought, okay, that's odd. And then 2 Capitol Police officers rushed onto the House floor, grabbed our number 2, Steny Hoyer, and marched him off the floor so fast, I remember thinking to myself, I've never seen Steny move that fast. And by now, I could tell that something was up, and members were starting to look at their phones and watch footage of what was going on outside the building. Soon, a Capitol Police officer came onto the floor and said, you need to get your gas masks out. They were under our chairs, and you need to get ready to get down on the ground. And soon thereafter, he returned to the floor and said, you need to get out. And at this point, they were battering the doors and breaking the windows. And that's when I had this conversation with these 2 Republican members. And I walked out with one of the Republicans who was carrying a large wooden post. We had these wooden posts on the House floor that had hand sanitizer attached to it. And it still had the hand sanitizer on there, but he's carrying this wooden post, and he was evidently going to use it as a club to defend himself. And I said to him, are you really that worried? And he said, yes, I think I just heard gunshots, and it was when Ashley Babbitt was shot. And he had a member pin on, but there are a lot of relatively new members meeting in their first, second, or even third term who I don't know. And I said, how long have you been here, meaning in Congress? And he looked at me and he said, 72 hours. And I said, 72 hours? And he said, I just got elected. I just replaced John Ratcliffe. And I didn't know what to say, so I looked at him and I said, it's not always like this. So he walked on ahead, and I ended up walking out with a good friend of mine, Sean Patrick Maloney of New York, and Sean said, he looked at this guy with the hand sanitizer post, and he said, either that guy is really worried about his safety, or he's just really devoted to hand hygiene. But we went back to this secure room, and that's where I had the conversation with my colleagues. And, you know, I think one of the things that happened over time that I wasn't expecting, and I think it's true in general of a lot of traumatic events, is that the trauma grows with time. But it also grew because we got to see just how many thousands of people had surrounded the Capitol. But the feeling that really grew over time was the realization that these people attacking the police and attacking the building and wanted to attack us, they really believed the big lie. But the people in the chamber that I work with on the other side of the aisle, they knew it was a lie. And I found myself growing much more furious with them, what I've taken to calling the insurrectionists in suits and ties, because they were knowingly pushing out a lie that was undermining the foundation of our democracy. If we can't rely on elections to decide who gets to govern, then what is left but violence? And for me it was, and I think for many of my colleagues in the caucus, a relationship-altering event in the way that even nothing that had gone on before, and there were a fair number in my case of relationship-altering events, it was hard for me to even look them in the face.
Yeah. What's great about the book is you start there, but then you also kind of give us a little, a sketch of your early life and your family, and then we sort of march toward this, incredible event that took place. Obviously, law school, and Eve is here, and you met Eve, and you
That's
have
my wife, Eve. I don't know where she is, but she is here.
She's here somewhere.
It is Adam and Eve.
It is Adam and Eve. I knew that, and I still looked it up because I wanted to make sure, and that it's profound and spectacular. And you also were very involved, got involved with Big Brother. And today, backstage, I met a woman who is the mother of one of your mentees when he was 8, and you began a relationship with him, who is now a very successful television writer. Yes? And so this program was very, very important to you. And you write in the book, and it was so moving, this sentence. You said, on the application, little brothers were asked what 3 things they wished for. Normally, a child would list the material objects they wanted, a bike, a skateboard, or a room of their own. But on one of the applications, the child made the following 3 asks: a big brother, a puppy, and a beautiful world. A beautiful world. What 5 or 6-year-old kid uses one of their precious 3 wishes for something as selfless and abstract as a beautiful world? And David Macmillan was his name. A beautiful world. Adam Schiff.
I would have never used one of my wishes for that, I can tell you that.
It's such a profound, it made me weep when I read that. So after all of your firsthand experiences these past few years, is it possible? What do you think most Americans may still not understand about the real threats to our democracy and the impossible dream of a beautiful world? Because you can't have that without a democracy.
I think what maybe people don't fully appreciate, because we saw those horrific images of the attack on the Capitol, and people may be under the impression that's how democracies end, with a violent attack on the Capitol. The greater threat actually is not another violent attack on the Capitol, although I have to acknowledge that given the president is out pushing the same big lie that led to the first one, you can't exclude the possibility of another one. But the way democracies more often come to an end is through quasi-legal means, through using the mechanism of a democracy to destroy the democracy itself. And we see that going on right now all over the country. As Republicans are pushing a whole slate of laws to disenfranchise particularly people of color, but also to strip elections officials of their duties and give them over to partisan boards and legislatures. Essentially, what Donald Trump walked away from the insurrection and learned was not that he needed more insurrectionists to attack the Capitol, but that if he couldn't get Brad Raffensperger, the Secretary of State in Georgia, to find 11,780 votes that don't exist, he darn well needed to find somebody the next time who would. And around the country, these independent elections officials are being hounded out of their jobs. And the laws are being changed so that it is far easier to overturn an election the next time that they lose. And this, to me, is among the most grave threats to our democracy. Now, I titled the book Midnight in Washington because, well, in part because it was the title of a speech I gave during the trial, but also because midnight is the darkest moment of the day everywhere in the world. But it's also a hopeful time because you know that what follows after is filled with light. We're going through a really difficult and dark time in the country. But we are going to get through this. I have every confidence we're going to get through this But what we do right now will determine how quickly we get through it, how much damage we have to suffer along the way. And I write about a lot of heroes in the book because we need inspiration these days. We need the inspiration of the example of the heroes, not just the villains. And I had the good fortune to meet a lot of truly heroic people during the last several years that certainly inspired me to keep fighting. And I don't want people to walk away from our talk or this book and be in despair. We don't have the luxury of despair. And what's more, we are an incredibly resilient country that has been through worse and more difficult times. So we will get through this, but we all have a key role to play.
I will look forward to the speech that you give called A Beautiful World, which I'm confident that you will be able to give at some point. And we will all celebrate you for it. So I want to just sort of, again, trying to, it was very daunting to look at that book and go, you have 30 minutes. Like, okay, I can do it. So I'm going to try to frame it. Give me a break. I'm going to try to frame it. So you brought it up just now, the big lie, the lie, the lies, the lies, the lies, the lies, the lies, the lies. There's a quote from the book. Over the next 4 years, Trump would become so fixated on finding Clinton's email server and any personal emails that had been deleted from it that he would seek the help of Russia and then the Ukraine to do so, imperiling his presidency and the security of our country. Destructive in its own right, Destructive in its own right, the politicization? Say the word.
Politicization, I think, of Benghazi is...
Yeah. Of the attack on the U.S. diplomatic facilities in Benghazi was a bridge to a Republican future in which facts no longer mattered, and those who exposed the truth would become enemies of the people. Up would be down, black would be white, and American constitutional democracy would be in grave danger. And my question is, in this anecdote, there is in the book an anecdote of an interaction that you had with Kevin McCarthy. And you've called him an insurrectionist in a suit. Can you tell a little more about that interaction with him?
Certainly. One of the questions I get most often from my constituents and others around the country is, do the Republicans really believe what they're saying? What do they say when you're in private? And I thought this particular interaction I had with Kevin McCarthy was very telling in those terms, but I also wanted to write about it because someone of his character or lack of character can never be allowed to go anywhere near the Speaker's office. So I was seated on a plane. This was in 2010. I was seated on United Airlines flying back to D.C. And just by coincidence, I was seated next to Kevin McCarthy. Now, we didn't really know each other. We represent California districts, but they're far apart. So this was really the first time that we had a conversation. And we had the kind of typical airline conversation that you have when you're waiting for the movie, any movie, to start. And so in this case, it was about the midterms, which were 6 months away. And I said that I thought the economy would remain strong and the Democrats would remain in the majority. And not surprisingly, he said, well, I think the Republicans are going to win. And the movie started, and I said, thank God. And I thought nothing of it. We land in Washington. We go our separate ways. And he goes off apparently and gives a briefing to the press. Now, this was 2010, so we didn't have the I don't know how to describe social media. I'm not sure the right adjective at the moment. So I had to wait till the morning to find out that he even did a briefing, let alone what he said. And apparently he told the press that the Republicans were definitely going to win the midterms. Everybody knew it. He rode on the plane back to Washington the night before with Adam Schiff, and even Adam Schiff admitted Republicans were going to win the midterms. And I was beside myself. And I made a beeline for him on the House floor. And I said, Kevin, First of all, if we're having a private conversation on the plane, I would have thought it was a private conversation, but if it wasn't, I said the exact opposite of what you told the press. And he looks at me and he says, yeah, I know, Adam, but you know how it goes. And I said, no, Kevin, I don't know how it goes. You just make shit up and that's how you operate, because that's not how I operate. But that is how he operates. And in that respect, he was really meant for a time like this, when the leader of his party believes that truth isn't truth and everybody's entitled to their own alternate facts. Of all the destructive aspects, and there have been so many of the last 4 years, among the most corrosive to our democracy has been this relentless attack on the truth. If there's no shared experience, then how do you govern? How do you decide who to vote for? I remember rushing back to my dormitory in college to watch Walter Cronkite's last broadcast. And that was a time when there was a large body of agreed upon fact, and we might differ with what to do with those facts, but we at least agreed that there were facts. And it's such a different world now. Such a different world. But we cannot allow someone like that, with such little regard for the truth, to become third in line for the presidency. And what's more, if Kevin McCarthy were ever to become speaker, effectively Donald Trump would be the speaker, because he will do whatever Trump asks him to do, no matter how immoral or unethical. This is a man who spent part of his day, which he thought was a good use of his time, separating out the starbursts that Donald Trump liked to eat. There is...
You mean, and then the ones he didn't like?
He took out the ones that Trump didn't like and gave Trump the ones he did like.
Yes.
Which is what we expect our legislative leadership to be doing.
Speaking of Trump, I was particularly sort of astonished by some scenes that you have where you're meeting with Trump in the White House while you were investigating his misconduct. I'm really interested. I know everybody here would be super interested to hear. I was going to read a little bit from it, but you'll read it in the book. I would love to just get your thoughts about, what must have been just a bizarre, charade. I can't even imagine.
I had 2 meetings with him in the White House during his presidency. One was more surreal than the other, but they were both completely surreal. The first was during a saga called The Midnight Run, where my counterpart, Devin Nunes, got out of a car he was in with his staff, got into an Uber, went to an undisclosed location, and purportedly met with what was implied to be a whistleblower, and looked at documents that he would later claim suggested the Obama administration had been spying on the Trump administration, or Trump campaign. It turns out the documents that he got were from the White House. The whole thing was a charade. And at some point, while this whole thing was blowing up, the president invited me to come to the Oval Office to review the documents. And it was kind of funny because I was sitting in the bunker, this Schiff 3 floors below the Capitol, watching a White House press conference before I even knew that I was being invited to go look at these documents at the White House. And Sean Spicer was at the podium saying, and we've invited Adam Schiff to come look at the documents at the White House. And I looked at my staff and I said, they did? And Spicer says, we sent him an invitation. I'm like, they did? What invitation? And one of my staff walked in and said, this invitation. And so I go to the White House. I'm told I cannot bring my staff director into the Oval Office, which concerned me because it meant there would be no witness to our conversation. And I didn't want the president to be discussing the Russia investigation and misrepresent what went on. But they were insistent that I could not have a witness. So I went into the Oval Office. He was sitting behind the desk. And he looked so out of place. It was like Mad Magazine come to life. And I remember thinking, here's this guy who pretended to be a successful businessman, now pretending to be president. And he got up from behind the desk, and he came over, and he shook my hand, and he said, you know, you do a good job. And when someone says that, your natural impulse is to say, well, so do you. I couldn't do it. And there was this awkward pause where I said, thank you. And we talked, I tried to steer the conversation away from Russia. And at one point we were talking about prescription drugs, and we got on the subject of my wonderful, dear departed colleague, Elijah Cummings. And he said, Elijah Cummings says a lot of nice things about me. And I remember thinking to myself, I've never heard Elijah Cummings say anything nice about him. But the next time I was invited to the White House was, you might recall, the Iranians downed an American drone, and Trump was trying to determine what action the U.S. should take. And this, I have to say, was a completely different kind of a meeting and a completely different kind of an impression, because I think he genuinely wanted to get different views than the ones he was getting from John Bolton and Pompeo, who I think were pushing him to greater and greater provocative acts that might lead us to war with Iran. And we get to the cabinet room for the meeting, and I sit down at the table before the president comes in, and I'm with the legislative leadership in the House, so there are about a dozen of us, and his cabinet on one side. And Trump comes in and he sits down on the other side of the table, and he looks over. I'm the first person he sees, and he literally blanches. And it was apparent to me that they must have told him they were inviting the chair of the Intelligence Committee, but didn't tell him who it was, because he clearly wasn't expecting me. And he says to me, I'm glad you're here. And I said, well, I'm glad I'm here. And we were waiting for the speaker to arrive and making small talk. And Mark Esper, the incoming Secretary of Defense, was in the room. And I had known Mark, and he was a less partisan person than the other people that were being considered. And I wasn't sure that he had the gravitas for that position. But otherwise, I thought he was a perfectly acceptable choice. And I told the president that I'd known him for some time, and I thought that the president had made a very good choice in defense secretary. And it was interesting because he didn't respond at all. But then later in the meeting, he comes back to me, and he says, just how long have you known him? And I thought, oh God, I've just killed his confirmation.
Again, I'm going to try to sort of jump ahead a little bit. The reading of the documents of the phone call, I was along with your staff with the holy shits. There's a lot of holy shits here. Forgive me. I am now quoting directly from the book. Holy shit, I said as I read through the first couple of pages. Oh my God, exclaimed one staff member. Jesus Christ, blurted another. We were all racing through the document. It was a chorus of expletives and biblical references. Have you gotten to page 4 yet? No, I'm just trying to wrap my head around page 2. Do you see where Zelensky's asking about the javelins? I would like you to do us a favor, though. Can you believe he said that? As for me, I kept muttering the same thing over and over. Holy shit, holy shit, holy shit. And finally, I can't believe they would release this. Just walk us through that time a little bit, please.
Well, where we were is we were informed by the Inspector General for the intelligence community that a whistleblower had filed a complaint, and the statute requires that the Director of National Intelligence, the head of all the intelligence agencies, has a certain number of days to read it and turn it over to Congress. And that number of days had expired, and he had not turned it over to Congress. And the Inspector General, who was aware of the complaint, informed our committee, you should have received this, you haven't received this, I think you need to know that. And I called the head of the intelligence community, his name was McGuire, Director McGuire, and I said, the statute says shall, turn it over, not may, not might, but shall. And he was not prepared to turn it over, and I said, well, I'm going to require you to come testify in open session, and you can explain to the country why you're the first Director of National Intelligence to refuse to turn over a whistleblower complaint. And the whole point of the hearing that I was teeing up was to try to coerce and compel the release of that complaint. Now, we didn't have the call record either. And so on the eve of the hearing, the White House made the decision, if they were going to have to release the whistleblower complaint, then they were essentially going to have to release the call record that it described. And they started to intimate the day before that they were going to release the call record. And suddenly I started getting a little nervous. They're actually going to release this thing. Does that mean that the call record isn't going to be what I think it is? Or does it mean that they're going to release a doctored version of the call record? Or maybe there's more than one version of the call record because there are a number of people taking notes on the call. It's actually not a transcript. And then when the thing came out, I remember I was in my office, again in that bunker, and one of my staff yelled out, "It's out," and brought this document into me. And that's when we had that scene. And I was just astounded at how blatant Donald Trump was in seeking to coerce the president of Ukraine to dig up dirt on his opponent. And then I was even more astonished that they would give us this. Because he was making claims of privilege over things that weren't even remotely privileged. But here was actually a call between two heads of state where there's a not particularly frivolous claim you could make that's protected. And so, yes, we were in some state of shock at just how bad it was. And of course, that really just kicked the investigation into high gear.
Again, now things are really heating up. And I quote again, "In anticipation of the hearings, we also began strategically releasing the deposition transcripts, giving the press time to absorb each along with a helpful guide to the most salient points. In this way, the public would hear the testimony 3 times, once through the transcripts, once through the House hearings, and if it went to trial, once more in the Senate." And then there's this beautiful section, which of course we all remember. I remember weeping watching it. "The real moment of the day came late in the hearing, and once again it was Sean Patrick Maloney who elicited the most powerful testimony. He asked Vindman to reread the end of his opening remarks, where he told his father not to worry, and then Maloney asked him this: 'You realized when you came forward out of a sense of duty that you were putting yourself in direct opposition to the most powerful person in the world. Do you realize that, sir?' 'I knew I was assuming a lot of risk,' Vindman replied. And I'm struck by that word, that phrase, do not worry, you addressed to your dad. And he would have worried if you were putting yourself up against the President of the United States. Is that right?' Maloney asked. He deeply worried about it because in his context, it was the ultimate risk. 'And why do you have confidence that you can do that and tell your dad not to worry?' 'Congressman,' Vindman replied, 'because this is America. This is the country that I've served and defended, that all of my brothers have served. And here, right matters.'" Does it, Adam? Does right matter? Can we believe that? I believe it in my core, but given what happened, can right matter? That was the most moving,
It does matter. It does matter. And I remember thinking when I heard him say that, and I was just as moved as you were. He said it like a prayer. There was a real innocent quality to Vindman that surprised me. For this guy who had served in Iraq and earned a Purple Heart when he was struck by an improvised explosive device, he'd seen a lot. And yet there was this real...
and lost a lot.
And lost a lot. And
his brother.
His brother, when the president wanted to retaliate, he not only marched Alexander Vindman out of the White House, but marched his brother out as well. But I think that his testimony had a profound effect. I think, moved millions of people. And one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic about the future is that there are far more of the American people who love this democracy, who love this country, who believe that right does matter. They far outnumber those who wish to tear it down. And that's what gives me such hope for the future. Alexander Vindman's courage, and not just Alexander Vindman, but it was really also interesting that some of the most profound heroes that came out of these hearings were all immigrants. Marie Yovanovitch and Fiona Hill. Mm-hmm. Marie Yovanovitch was the first through the breach, because Marie Yovanovitch was told, like all the other witnesses, not to testify. Here was this courageous woman, this ambassador to Ukraine, this just champion of democracy, this fierce anti-corruption crusader. She's in Kyiv. She's attending a ceremony honoring a Ukrainian woman who was also an anti-corruption fighter, who had acid thrown in her face, and who died a terrible, painful death months later. So Maria Ivanovich is in Kyiv honoring this woman when she's contacted by her own State Department and told, you need to get out of Ukraine. We cannot vouch for your safety. And she has no idea what's going on, and they tell her, you need to be on the next plane. The president and his son and these hate mongers on Fox had so smeared her that her life was in danger. This woman who had served in places like Mogadishu was now at risk, not because of where she was posted, but because of people in the United States in positions of power who were smearing her. They wanted her out of the way so they could move forward with their corrupt scheming in the election. She's told not to testify. And even the night before she was scheduled to come in, we couldn't be sure whether she would testify. But she did. And when she walked in those doors, there was just this hushed silence in the room. And, but for her courage, I don't know that anyone would have followed. When she got up at the end of that testimony, and during the hearing, the president was attacking her during the hearing. When she got up, the whole room stood up with her and applauded. It was really beautiful and powerful, and there are far more Americans who believe in Marie Yovanovitch and believe in the country that attracted her to come here in the first place than want to tear it down. They will lead this country in the future, not the Donald Trumps and not the Kevin McCarthys, but the Marie Yovanovitches and the Alexander Vindmans and the Fiona Hills and the Bill Taylors, the Dan Coates, who was willing to risk his job and lose his job, former Republican senator who was then the head of the intelligence agencies. There's some really heroic people that have kept our democracy held together over the last 4 years and will get us through this.
All right, I have two final questions, and then I want to open it up to people so that they have an opportunity to ask you. So 50 years from now, what do you hope history will say about this time when we're looking back?
That Adam Schiff got to be on the stage with Jamie Lee Curtis.
Yes, that's exactly what it's going to say.
That's what I'm hoping, and that the latest Halloween movie breaks all records.
Yes, I know. All of that is great. Yes, fabulous. But what will they say?
Well,
about?
I've been convinced through all of this that history will not be kind to Donald Trump. That he will be repudiated in the most vehement terms, and that everyone that enabled him will be tarred with that. I think there were a few things I said during the trial that I think at least got the attention of the senators, and one of them was when I said that if they didn't honor their oaths, if they didn't do their duty, that their names would be tied to his with a cord of steel and for all of history. And I really think that's exactly what's going to happen. I don't understand I don't understand what these people are going to tell their grandkids. I think their grandkids are going to say to them one day, grandmother, grandfather, what did you do when that awful man was running the country, when that man was putting children in cages, when that man was tearing down our democracy? Tell me you stood up to him. Tell me you did something. I don't know what they're going to say. I was so moved listening to Mitt Romney deliver his verdict. And I think most people think that after the impeachment trial, like in a criminal trial, we all assembled in the Senate to hear the verdict. And it's true, we did assemble, and the roll call was called, and people said guilty or not guilty. But we knew before that what the verdict was going to be, because over the 3 days between the end of the trial and the vote to convict or acquit, all of the senators came to the Senate floor and said to a mostly empty chamber what they planned to do. And by the time Mitt Romney took to the Senate floor, we knew what everyone was going to do that there was any question about. I mean, for most of the senators, there wasn't much of a mystery where they were going. But I was in the House cloakroom, which is this little ornate room off of the House floor, when Mitt Romney took to the Senate floor. And as I was listening to him, it began in a way that I'd heard some of the others begin, with a condemnation of the president's conduct. And even then, I kept waiting for the inevitable but, as I had heard with so many of the other senators. But then it became apparent it wasn't coming. And when it became clear that he was going to become the first senator in history to vote to remove a president of his own party, when he began to talk about his faith and how deeply religious he was, and he began talking about his children and his grandchildren, I remember thinking to myself that this is what the founders had in mind when they believed, against all reason at the time, that people possess sufficient virtue to govern themselves, that we didn't need to be ruled by a despot. And I ended up feeling quite uplifted at the end of the trial, even though we lost. We knew we were going to lose the trial. There were two juries we were aiming for. There was the jury in the Senate, which we knew we would lose, and then there was the jury of the American people, which in my view was the much more important jury. And I do think for the jury of the American people, right still matters. And that's why I'm optimistic about the future.
And I was going to ask you a question about threat to the democracy today, but I want to end my part with you with right matters and the possibility of hope. So I'm going to open it up to people. I don't know how that process happens, but I believe there are microphones. Am I correct?
Okay, am I the first? Okay. First, I'm so sorry to hear about the vituperative attacks you've endured for so many years, and I just want you to know that I, and I think many of our fellow citizens, feel the exact opposite and admire you enormously. I was very glad to hear about what you were talking about. You were talking about the title of your book and the inherent hope that may imply. I have to confess I don't yet feel that way at all. I'm very pessimistic. I'm concerned that we may literally lose our democracy within 2 to 3 years, perhaps, due to some of the measures you talked about in terms of voter suppression and in terms of replacing voter officials with Trump loyalists. So my question for you is, do you see any kind of realistic path, given that we have Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, who are heinous folks, in my opinion, and are so far giving no indication that there's any wiggle room towards passing any comprehensive voter legislation, which is even coming up in the Senate next week. So given that they seem unwilling to carve out any kind of path towards doing so, and without that, I think we may slide into autocracy. My question for you is, do you see any realistic path towards passage of comprehensive voter legislation?
Well, thank you for the nice comments, and I've been very fortunate to have a very strong wife who has helped me get through all of this, and wonderful constituents who've had my back all along the way. I think you're right. I think that the H.R. 1 legislation and the John Lewis Voting Rights Bill are two of the most important bills of my lifetime. I think they are existential to our democracy. I don't understand where Kristen Sinema is coming from. I understand a bit more with Joe Manchin because I understand a little more about West Virginia, but Arizona is not West Virginia. I do think that Joe Manchin is the key. That if we can move Joe Manchin, that Kristen Sinema will not be an island. And I think that it's possible to move Joe Manchin. The sense that I had from him during the trial, and the Senate chamber is a very small place. I wasn't used to it. I was used to this big House floor, and in the Senate, you can look around the room and you can see exactly what people are thinking, whether they're paying attention or they're moved or they're not moved. And my sense, both from talking to Joe Manchin but also just observing Joe Manchin, was that if we could prove the president's guilt, if we could demonstrate to him that the president, if left in office, would remain a danger to the country in such a way that he could explain it back home, that he would vote to convict. And we did, and he did. Now, I think Trump must have won West Virginia by about 30 points. Trump is more popular in West Virginia than in Mitt Romney's state of Utah. And in that sense, it was a more courageous vote for Joe Manchin than even Mitt Romney. Now, Mitt Romney had to vote against the party, and that's another act of courage. But it should be so much easier of a case to make to Joe Manchin that if you're going to do a carve-out of the filibuster, it ought to be about voting rights. Mitch McConnell had no problem carving out stacking the Supreme Court with justices who don't reflect the views of America. We cannot allow the filibuster to be used to protect a new generation of Jim Crow laws. That to me is not a hard case to make. But I do think, observing Joe Manchin, that the way to make that case is probably not going to West Virginia and campaigning against him. I think the case has to be made by Joe Biden, and I think it has to be made very personally. What I'm hoping is going on, and I'm just speculating here, I think the way to find that path with Joe Manchin is to show that everything else was tried, and failing to move any of the Republicans to do the right thing, it was necessary as a last resort to carve this out of the filibuster. And so the vote that Schumer is organizing for this week may be part of what's necessary to show Joe Manchin so that he can show his people back home that he tried everything to do this in a bipartisan way. But to me, that is the only path. I will say this, we can't wait for that. We need to be embarking on a Stacey Abrams-like effort in every single state in the union. And we are. So we need to do both at the same time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great.
Okay, like everybody here, I probably have 1,000 more questions than we could answer today. But I have two related questions. Will these guys you subpoenaed play out the clock? And can Bannon claim the fifth for something he's already been pardoned for?
Well, first of all, we are deathly serious about moving as fast as we can to get answers on the Select Committee. And that is not a Democratic view or Republican view. It is a unanimous view of all of our members, including our very two conservative Republicans. And so Bannon failed to show up this week, and we are wasting no time. On Tuesday, we will vote to hold him in criminal contempt. And now the process is we will have that vote in committee. It will go to the full floor. We will vote to hold him in criminal contempt on the full floor, and it will be reported to the Justice Department for prosecution. Now, the statute says that the Justice Department has a duty to present it to the grand jury. That duty has not always been honored, but I was very encouraged to see what Joe Biden said the other night, when he was asked about this, he was asked, should people who don't fulfill their legal obligations when they're subpoenaed be prosecuted? And his answer was an unequivocal, yes, they should. So we are going to move very quickly. Now, I think what you're familiar with is when we've had to use civil litigation, and they could take us up and down to the Supreme Court and all the rest of that. That is very time-consuming. A criminal prosecution can go much faster, but it also has the salutary effect of sending a message to every other would-be obstructor that you will be prosecuted, and you may go to jail. And I do think that the prospect of jail has the effect of concentrating one's mind. So I think we're going to move very quickly. Now, can he claim the Fifth for something he's already been pardoned for? As a general matter, the answer is no. But here, he was pardoned for a different criminal scheme, as I recall. I haven't looked at the exact language of the pardon, but I don't think you can get a get-out-of-jail-free for life card. And if I can just say, because this continues to shock me, man runs for president on a platform of building a wall that Mexico is going to pay for. It's an absurd idea. Of course, he doesn't build the wall. Mexico doesn't pay for it. Instead, his pals, including Mr. Bannon, start raising money from his own supporters to build a wall, which they then steal. And Trump pardons them. He pardons them for stealing from his own people. The guy is nothing more than a grifter. The whole pack of them were just grifters. It is incredible to me that they could ever be plausible candidate for dog catcher, let alone president.
In addition to everything you've just said, and with answers to the previous gentleman's questions, what is your feeling? Because like the first person who asked you a question, I'm somewhat pessimistic also as to not so much the democracy, but what the democracy of this country will do with regards to the state of New York and their prosecution, or their, not prosecution, but their legal process. And as you just said, the legal process can drag on forever versus the criminal process. And the state of New York has probably lots of evidence in their back pocket, but where are they going with it? And will it ever happen in our lifetime?
I don't know where they're going with it. I can tell you this, after I think we all waited for what Bob Mueller would find and report, that we can't wait or hope or expect a prosecutor's office in New York or anywhere else to solve this problem for us or our country. We just can't. Now, I may have a different view than the Justice Department. My feeling is that any crime committed by the former president or those around him needs to be fully investigated. And it may be that down the road you have to make a difficult decision about what's in the best interest of the country in terms of whether you seek to jail the former president. But you don't ignore the crimes. I think if anyone in this room had been on the phone with the Secretary of State of Georgia and asked them to find 11,780 votes that don't exist, you would probably be under indictment by now. And I don't understand why I see no signs of the Justice Department investigating that crime. Now, the Fulton County District Attorney is investigating that, but does the Fulton County District Attorney have the heft to take on a prosecution against the President of the United States, the former president? I don't know. But it shouldn't be their responsibility alone. After Nixon was pardoned, and the Justice Department during Trump took the position that a sitting president cannot be indicted, if we now take the position that a former president cannot be prosecuted, then we're effectively saying the president is above the law. And that to me is the greater risk than looking backwards. Because I don't know how we look forward without a full accounting for what's gone on.
Thank you. So why do you think that so many smart, successful Republicans who have done well within the system are turning against the system and are supporting the lies and the Trumpism? And then related to that, do you think that without COVID, Trump would have been re-elected?
And I'm sorry, with the mask, it's hard to hear.
Yeah, so the first question is, why are there so many Republicans who have done well within the current system?
Yes.
And they are smart, successful, supporting Trump and all the lies?
Yes.
And then with all the numbers and the votes that he got in the second election, had it not been for COVID, could he have won the re-election?
Yeah, yeah. Well, why are so many Republicans who are doing very well still supporting Donald Trump? And look, I think there are a number of reasons why people supported Trump of various income levels. I put the folks who supported Donald Trump in a few different categories. Probably the largest category of people who supported Donald Trump are people who are just absolutely devoted Republican voters. They're what we would call in the Democratic Party, or used to call yellow dog Democrats. That was an expression my father used to use, and it meant that they would vote for a yellow dog before they'd vote for a Republican. And they're Republicans who are that devoted to their party. That's perhaps the biggest group. I think there was also that group I mentioned that are in economically distressed areas. And when the candidate on the left promising a revolution wasn't available anymore, they went with the guy promising to break everything. They'd had a Clinton as president before, they'd had a Bush as president before, their life had not changed. That was not an irrational decision to make. Now, to make it again, I think is crazy, but the first time was not irrational. Then there was the group, I think, that voted for Donald Trump because he was promising to drain the swamp. And they thought, well, this orange-haired billionaire from New York, beholden to no one, maybe he will really drain the swamp. And of course, he turned it into a complete cesspool. And finally, there were those who answered the dog whistles of bigotry. And one of the terrible realizations for me, and I know for people of color, it's no realization at all, because it's been so clear for so long. But to me, to see just how much bigotry there was just below the surface. And so I don't think rich or poor, in between, you can really put everyone in the same category. But I do think that those that supported him because they wanted to drain the swamp and found that he so deeply misled them and was the biggest grifter we've ever had, and those who felt that the country wasn't delivering, that the economy wasn't working for them or their families, and there was just no hope. Those are the folks that we can win over, that we must win over, and I believe we will win over, which is why I am optimistic, all evidence to the contrary.
Thank you.
I'm a little shorter than others. Okay, thank you. My name is Melanie Fine. I'm a teacher here at this wonderful school. Are there other teachers here?
you!
And I write children's books, so maybe
You're a
one day
hero.
we'll talk. But thank you so much, Congressman Schiff, for being here. I have to tell you, it's not that I'm pessimistic. I'm scared. I don't see a way out. I see that we're taking fists to a gunfight, that the Republicans play below the belt. They play on the fear card. They do everything they can to get their way, regardless if it's ethical or moral. And I think that watching what's going on in Washington from our vantage point right now is scary, because we've got two holdouts that we have a majority in both houses that probably, unfortunately, just based on history, is a very temporary majority. We always know what happens in midterm elections. And What can we Democrats do who are probably representing a larger percentage of the people of the United States? What can we do to affect change when we don't use the scare tactics that Trump uses and his cronies use? Where's the hope in that? I just feel like time is ticking by, and we're going to end up back with Mitch McConnell, et cetera, and I'm scared.
Well, you know, I really appreciate the question. I think the answer is inherent in the question. There are far more Americans who feel the way you and I do than are voting Republican. It's why Mitch McConnell has been so devoted over the last 10 years to disenfranchising people. The Republican Party knows that they are a dinosaur, that their views are unpopular, that they're a decreasing share of the American people, and their only hope of continuing in power is to make sure that people don't vote, particularly people of color, but people don't vote. That's their only hope. It's why they invest so much in these disenfranchisement efforts around the country. You know, the big lie is just the most recent and the most awful pretext. If we turn out, we win. It's as simple as that.
That's a good slogan.
Well, it is. And so we know what we have to do. We know what we have to do. But I will say this, because I talk to so many people that will come up to me in the street in tears about what's been happening. And I would say, don't try to do everything, because that way lies paralysis. Just try to identify the one thing that you're going to do between now and the midterms to make a difference. And the wonderful thing about the virtual world we're living in right now is you can make a difference in Georgia from your own bedroom. You can make a difference. You can use your skills, whatever your skills may be. You can use your skills in a way that moves the country forward. You know, here in my district, they were doing, I think, a brilliant thing at the LGBT Center, where when healthcare was on the line and we wanted Lisa Murkowski's vote, they weren't calling Lisa Murkowski from Hollywood, California. What good would that do? But they had identified people in Alaska that they could call. And so my constituents called the constituents in Alaska and asked them to call Lisa Murkowski, and they did. And of course, environmental groups can do the same thing, and women's rights groups can do the same thing, and the voting rights groups can use you as a force multiplier. So do not despair. We cannot despair. As the speaker likes to say, we don't agonize, we organize. When I knew, and you know, one other thing about the midterms, about that historic trend. The reason why the party that's in power in the White House, particularly after the first election of the president, the reason why they historically lose so many seats is because historically, when that president got elected, it swept into office all of these House members of the same party representing districts that they really demographically couldn't hold. So you had all these Democrats, when a Democrat was elected president, representing Republican districts, and then there was a correction in the midterms where those districts reverted to form. The thing is, though, in the last election when Joe Biden was elected, it didn't happen. Far from sweeping in a lot of Democratic House members, we lost the House members, a lot of them that we gained in 2018. We've had our correction, which means that whoever wins the midterms coming up is not going to win by very much. It may be decided by a handful of votes. And you know, you don't actually have to go to Alaska or Georgia. We've got a race that we're going to have in the Santa Clarita Valley, and we're going to have 2 or 3 in Orange County, and we're going to have more in Northern California. And they may be very close. It's no exaggeration to say that California and, in fact, LA and Orange County may decide who controls the House. So we know what we have to do.
If we show up, we win.
If we show up, we win.
I want to just ask our bosses here. Where's my boss? How are we doing on time?
I love being your boss.
I'm a type A girl. I just want to know what my job is. Are we still good? We have a question right here. How are we good?
Yeah, we're good. How many are you to take, 2 more from each side, let's say?
Okay, so sorry, that means, I know, look, I know. Forgive me, that's why I wanted a boss, because then you don't have to stand there and feel bad. So we're going to do the next 2 in line, and I apologize to everybody else who was waiting. I like to organize things. I feel better now. We know what we're doing. Why don't you go?
Okay, hi, thanks.
On behalf of Adam Schiff, thank you for everything you're doing.
Okay.
Oh,
Do we need to let him?
This is my namesake. His name is also Adam Schiff.
You know what?
And,
Get back in line. The guy's name is Adam Schiff. We're going to let him ask a question. I'm a fair girl. Just give me a break.
This is the much improved version, I need to tell you.
Okay, so you're
Okay,
next.
So I'll make this quick. I'm just wondering if you can address the role that the media has in trying to fight back against this threat to our democracy, because I have been too often dismayed by what I see as the normalization of Trump, the trivialization of the real threats to democracy that's going on. So I wonder if you could address that.
Wow.
Thank you. That was the fastest question I've ever
I
gotten.
know.
And
Women, we get things done. Sorry.
About 16 years ago, I formed a bipartisan caucus on freedom of the press with a fellow new member of Congress named Mike Pence. So this has been a key issue and interest and concern of mine. I think it's been the most challenging time for the press in my lifetime, because the press was thrust in the position of either they held that president, Donald Trump, to the same standard they held every other president, in which case they would have to call him a liar every single day, multiple times a day, or they would have to treat him differently and have a different standard. And I think the reputable press organizations decided they could not adopt a different standard. It allowed the president, though, to claim that they were all his enemy. This is in the autocratic playbook. Donald Trump didn't invent it. It's what others like Erdogan in Turkey and al-Sisi in Egypt and certainly Putin in Russia do the same thing. The press hasn't always gotten it right. In 2016, my colleague Steve Israel and I were on the phone with the editor of the New York Times. This is when the Russians had hacked our elections. They were dripping these stolen Hillary Clinton emails. And we were making the argument to the editor of the New York Times that, first of all, not every stolen email is worth publishing. I don't think the country really needs to know John Podesta's risotto recipe. But if you think there are certain things that are of such importance that the public just has to know, even though they were stolen by a foreign power for the explicit purpose of influencing the outcome of our election, you should always preface that story by saying, in emails believed to be hacked by the Russians for the purpose of influencing our election, this is what we learned. So that people can at least put in context why they're getting what they're getting. They didn't do that in 2016. I think they've done a much better job since. The bigger challenge, frankly, is two things. One is social media, which I won't have time to go into the way I'd like to. The other is that the GOP, and this gets actually to the prior question, the GOP has an entire media apparatus. It has essentially their own version of state-run media in Fox News, now Newsmax and OAN, that can amplify the former president's lies. I'm convinced that if Richard Nixon had had Fox News, he would have never been forced to leave office. And I don't have a simple answer to that question, because in a country that rightly venerates the First Amendment, we're not able, and it wouldn't be desirable for us to tell a station what they can say or not say. But we are going to have to, as a country, learn to be much better consumers of information, because the balkanization of our media and the amplification of falsehood in the right-wing media is just killing us.
Thank you. Sir, your turn.
With your indulgence, Mr. Schiff, I lead into my question with an opinion. I promise to be brief. I'm guessing that many of us, yours truly included, have had the uncomfortable opportunity to say, "I told you so." But given the political landscape over the past couple of years, you certainly have gone there, but with grace, I might add. Question, how close do you think we as a democracy are at installing safeguards to prevent a successful and perhaps catastrophic violation of constitutional norms by a future president?
This is a very good question, and I think one of the things that we all learned during the last 4 years is that there were all these norms of office, norms of behavior that we thought were absolutely inviolate. We couldn't imagine that a president could dangle a pardon in front of someone, and with respect to someone else who was going to testify against them, employ the language of a mob boss and call them a rat. There's a long list, and among the worst for me, I served for about 6 years in the Justice Department, and I loved my time in the Justice Department. But to see what Bill Barr did to that department, to see the degree to which he used it to become the criminal defense firm for the president, to reduce the sentence of people who lied to Congress like Roger Stone, to make a case involving Michael Flynn, another liar, go away completely. And even worse and more serious, to turn the Justice Department into a vehicle to go after and persecute and prosecute the president's enemies. I never thought I would see anything like that in this country. And about a year and a half ago, I talked to the Speaker about this, and I said, we need our own package of post-Watergate reforms, just like the Congress in the 1970s. And I put together a package working with my fellow chairs called the Protecting Our Democracy Act, which addresses all of the norm breaking, all the violations with a remedy. And we hope to take that up on the House floor within the next month.
Your turn.
I think everyone, including myself, feels you have made us proud to be Americans again.
Yes.
Recently, Thomas Friedman of the New York Times and Fiona Hill were on television laying out a case for if we lose the midterms, Trumpism will be back and there'll be no turning them around. Trump is a baby. You know that because you can rattle his cage with a tweet when he had Twitter. If the Attorney General, Garland, cannot bring all the various cases and charges against him, Giuliani, et cetera, to the public to rattle his head, there has to be some way to attack. If Trump is so mentally distracted that he can't go to his rallies, I was listening to you, and I know there's incredibly honorable people you've been mentioning, and I was in tears watching the impeachment trial. I was very proud to be an American. But the result is the guy's still there. Trumpism is still there. So if the Attorney General can't speed up the prosecution or the state of New York and get his taxes like Capone, isn't there some, yes, we don't have Fox News, but somebody's got, Elizabeth Warren, when she tweeted against him, he was almost ready to cry. I think he has to be treated like the narcissistic baby he is, but who in the government, I'm just afraid we Democrats are too genteel. And the Republicans, they have one thing they do really well. They repeat lies, lies, lies. And, okay, I'm sorry.
No, listen, I appreciate what you have to say. And I've been accused of living rent-free in Donald Trump's head for a long time. In fact, I'll tell you a quick funny story. The Speaker and I did a press conference during the Ukraine investigation, and I think during the press conference I was talking about how if they obstructed our subpoenas, we would impeach the president for obstruction of Congress. And Pompeo at the time was refusing to turn over documents from the State Department. The president was evidently watching our press conference, and he was just fuming. And he was in a meeting with I think it was the president of Finland. and doing a joint press availability with the president of Finland. And he was so agitated by what I had said that in front of the president of Finland, he says that Adam Schiff couldn't carry Mike Pompeo's jockstrap. And I'm like, I can only imagine what the president of Finland is thinking right now. And one of the speaker's staff read this tweet the president put out that said Adam Schiff or whatever, blah, 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 bullshit. And the speaker looks at me and she says, "You're really in his head." But let me just say very quickly, because I hear this a lot. The Republicans fight hard. The Democrats are too polite. Look, I'm a full believer, and I hope you know, in fighting tooth and nail with these SOBs in the administration, the former administration. But I don't want to become them. And they don't care about tearing the country down. And if you don't care about tearing the country down, then you'll do anything. You'll default on the nation's credit. You'll breed a level of distrust in our elections where people don't think that our democracy works anymore. I'm not going to go there. You know, in my view, we're going to have to fight them harder and smarter and more tenaciously because we love our country more than they hate this democracy. And that's how we're going to beat them. But I understand because, you know, we are prone to talking about ideas. We're a very diverse party. It's more difficult to be unified in message when your party is diverse in every respect, but I view that diversity as a great strength. When I have to find one of the Republicans on the other side of the aisle on the House floor, it's very hard for me to find them because they all look like me, except meaner. But I wouldn't trade our diversity for anything. I think it's the great strength of our country.
Thank you.
Hi, Adam, Jamie, thank you so much for being here this afternoon, and thank you so much for the great service that you give our country. I'm an attorney, so my question has to do with how perplexed I've been at the low-level charges that the Department of Justice has brought against the insurrectionists. We know that if those insurrectionists had been Black Lives Matter, they would have been put up against a wall, okay? So I want to know, why are the charges of such a low level? Because the sentencing guidelines are not going to allow a judge to give them 5 years in prison. They're giving them 3 months. That is not going to deter anybody from ever doing this again. Why is the Department of Justice not properly charging these people, number one? And number two, what can Congress do to make sure that people are properly charged and that they spend time, serious time in prison for doing what they did?
Great question.
I had one of the Capitol Police officers stop me, this was about a week ago, as I was leaving the Capitol and asked me if I could explain something to him. And his question was yours. He said, "I don't understand why a woman who was in the Capitol committing an act of insurrection and is on video threatening to kill the speaker, why is she offered a misdemeanor? I don't understand. Can you explain that to me?" And I said, honestly, I spent almost 6 years as a prosecutor. I can't explain that to you. You know, I might be able to explain a plea deal like that if the evidence was very weak, but the evidence isn't very weak here. I can't explain it, and I really can't explain it. I don't understand. Now, what can the Congress do about it? Honestly, not very much. We don't have a role in sentencing. We aren't able to intervene in particular cases. The only aspect of that system that we have a role in is the one we're about to play on Tuesday, when we vote to hold Steve Bannon in criminal contempt. That we can do, and that we will do.
Are there any plans to start legislation that would really criminalize these kinds of actions to a level where there's no choice but the Justice Department to properly charge people?
The reality is that the Department of Justice has a range of charges they can already bring. And they have the discretion to choose which to bring. And so we could create yet another offense, but we couldn't compel them to use it. So I wish I had a more satisfactory answer, but I just don't. The role of the Congress in forcing prosecutors to exercise a certain discretion is just not one that we have a lot of say.
Do you have any idea why they're not charging them?
I probably should go to the last question. I'm sorry.
And the last question is going to be asked by Adam Schiff.
Adam Schiff.
To Adam Schiff. This is as meta as it gets.
It is Hollywood after all, right?
I feel the force field. So bring it, Adam Schiff, to Adam Schiff.
I'm very excited to bring the book home and confuse the heck out of my 5-year-old who has just started learning how to write his name and my name, and
perfect.
That'll be fun. You mentioned social media, which we don't want to get into too much, but in addition, there's the tech, there's regulations in the House, antitrust tech regulations, talking about something called deplatforming that would make it difficult to deplatform hate speech, insurrection. Just wondering what you think about that, about forget Facebook and Twitter and all that, but things like Google and YouTube and Amazon, other services that really control a lot of the web, that may not be able to take some of this hate speech and this awful speech that really made the insurrection possible offline. And I just want to say, you should know that there are a lot of Adam Schiff fans out there, as not just in this room, but I've gotten my share of hate, but mostly people, I say my name anywhere I go, and people say, thank him for me, or thank you, because they think I'm you. But there is a lot of respect, deep respect for you, from me and from your constituents.
Here, 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 here.
So thank you for everything you do.
Well, Adam and I have known each other for many years, and he only got me in trouble once when he was co-hosting a fundraiser for Cory Booker, and it was in Variety, and it said that Rep. Adam Schiff was hosting a fundraiser for Cory Booker, and Rush Holt was a colleague of mine in the House. I hadn't gotten involved in the race at that point, and Rush came up to me and he said, Adam, I'm really disappointed. You're my friend, and how could you do this? And I said, Rush, I know this is going to sound fishy, but it's a different Adam Schiff. But in terms of your question about social media, I think there are 3 things that we need to do. I think we need to change Section 230, which has given these companies immunity. The whole point of giving them immunity when they were nascent industries, and they're not so nascent anymore, was to encourage them to be good moderators of content. That is, to take down things that would offend community standards, take down bigotry, take down racism, take down hate. And if they're not going to use that immunity, because they were worried they might get sued if they were good actors. But if they're not going to be good actors, they shouldn't have the immunity. And in particular, I think if they're going to set their algorithms to amplify by engagement, the effect is to amplify hate, and to amplify fear, and to amplify falsehood and conspiracy. So I think we need to change Section 230. I think we need to insist on transparency with these companies so we understand the impact of Instagram on teenage girls, among many other issues. And I think we need legislation to protect the privacy of the American people.
Yeah.
I want to thank everybody for coming today. I want to thank Congressman
Thank
Schiff
you.
and Jamie Lee Curtis.
Thank you, Jamie.